Welcome to another episode of The Artsy Raven, a show about writing and publishing with your host, J.F. Garrard.
Welcome to another episode of The Artsy Raven with Neal Shusterman. So Neal is the New York Times bestselling author of more than 30 award-winning books for children, teens, and adults, including the Unwind, dystology, the Skinjacker trilogy, Downsiders, All Better Now, and Challenger Deep, which won the National Book Award. Scythe, the first book of his series Arc of a Scythe, is a Michael L. Printz Honor Book. He also writes screenplays for motion pictures and television shows. Neal is the father of four, all of whom are talented writers and artists themselves. So welcome, Neal.
Thank you very much.
Now, you've written more than 30 books across genres and age groups. Can you tell us about how your writing journey began and what first drew you to storytelling?
I've been telling stories since I was a kid. I really got interested in the idea of being a writer when I was in ninth grade. I had a great ninth grade English teacher who challenged me to write a story a month for extra credit because she knew that I loved writing. And by the end of ninth grade, I kind of really felt like a writer. But what really got me into writing books for teenagers was when I was 18, I got my first summer job working as a counselor at the summer camp, the same camp I went to when I was a kid. And I got to be known as a camp storyteller. And so I would make up stories and I had sort of this built-in audience. And I just really liked that. And the kids would always say, you got to write those stories into books. And so when I went off to college, I spent my free time writing the stories that I had come up with at camp into books that I came back with the next summer to give to them. And it was the third one of those, the Shadow Club, that got published.
Oh, now, did you go to college for writing or English or anything like that?
Well, when I first started, I was pre-med because, I guess I was good in math and science, and my parents said, "You're going to be a doctor." And so I said, "Okay, I'm going to be a doctor." But I really knew that I wanted to be a writer at that point. I changed my major to psychology and theater. So I double
Oh,
majored. Psychology is the science of the mind and behavior, and theater is the art of the mind and behavior. And I thought those would go together really well for writing. Plus, everybody I knew who wanted to be a writer was an English major. And
mhm.
I didn't want to just be one of, this big group. I sort of wanted to approach it differently. Also, I didn't like the idea of spending all my time writing analytical essays. So
Yes.
I was much more interested in writing screenplays, I mean, stage plays. And so I would write plays, I would perform in them, I would, explore the mind and psychology. And a lot of my stories were informed by the stuff that I, learned and did when I was at UC Irvine.
Okay, so after you graduated, did you end up working, or like was it easy to find a publisher after? Like, I'm trying to figure out, did you elk out a living as a writer afterwards or not?
Well, I had written my first two novels when I was in college, and they never got published for a good reason. They're awful, but with everything you write, you get better. My second book got me an agent, and that
Oh,
agent couldn't get the book published. Uh, so my first job out of college was working as a receptionist at a talent agency in Los Angeles because
oh,
everybody said, and I try to approach this logically. Everybody said in order to succeed in a creative field, you have to be in the right place at the right time,
mhm,
and you got to know people. It's all about who you know. Well, I knew absolutely nobody in entertainment or publishing, and I didn't know when the right time would be, but the one thing I had control of was being in the right place.
mhm.
So I went in to try to find an entry level position in either publishing or entertainment. And I got this job in Los Angeles working as a receptionist at a talent agency. And I would answer phones, I would type letters, and I would watch other people who were working there, other assistants who were all about their agenda. There were other assistants, they wanted to be directors, they wanted to be writers, they wanted to be actors, and they were always pushing themselves and they never lasted long. So I figured, okay, I'm not gonna push. I'm just gonna, do my job. And here I'm picking up the phone, I'm speaking with big producers and directors and writers. I'm, chatting with them while we're waiting for, for one of the bosses to pick up the phone. And so I'm sort of in the right place. I'm meeting people. About a couple of months into that job, I would spend my evenings staying there late in the office because I didn't have a computer.
Hmm.
but they had a computer in the office. So I would sit in the office and I would write. And I would be there until sometimes until 10 at night. And there was one agent who worked late because he had clients all over the world, so he kept weird hours. And he came out of his office at like 10 o'clock one night and saw me sitting at my desk. And he said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Oh, I'm working on this book." And he said, "Well, can I read it?" And suddenly, here I had an opportunity. I was in the right place and the right time finally came along. I didn't know anybody, but now I knew a big shot Hollywood agent. I gave him a script that I was working on and a few chapters of a book that I was working on. He read them and he came back to me and he said, "Neal, what are you doing at this desk? Quit. Quit this job. I will represent you and I will get you a film deal within 6 months."
Oh,
And so I quit the job and went to writing full time. Well, not full time. I actually, in order to pay the bills, I took a job driving a school bus.
yeah, because I'm thinking there's a wait. Like, even if you're gonna sell something, you're not gonna sell it right
Yeah.
away.
Yeah, so I was just a bus driver and was able to, the school buses, they only needed me in the mornings and the evenings. And so I spent my days writing. Within less than 6 months, I was able to sell a book and a script thanks to that agent. So, I was in the right place. The right time finally came along. I didn't know anybody, but now I did. And that's what started my career.
Oh, wow. Okay. And you sort of kept on writing. Like, do you when you write, like, do you prefer to write a screenplay or a novel or a short story? Like, you write in so many forms.
I like them all. I've been focusing more attention on the books now because the books have done remarkably well, and there's always fans waiting for the next one. And so I always feel as if I have to get to work on the next one. Uh, so I spend a little bit less time working on scripts now than I used to. But every once in a while, I get a chance to adapt my own material. I did an adaptation of Dry with my son Jared, who co-wrote Dry. I co-adapted Game Changer to a TV series with Brian Yorkie, who is a incredibly talented writer and producer. And now, I had a meeting with him a few weeks ago because Netflix decided not to make it as a TV series. We're going to rewrite it again. We're going to do it again as a feature. And so
Okay.
we're very excited about that.
Okay. Now tell me a little bit about your latest body of work, MindWorks. Can you give me a little bit of elevator pitch here?
Sure. Well, MindWorks is a compendium of short stories that span my entire career. There's stories from early in my career, stories that were published in different collections that are now out of print, stories that were in other people's anthologies. There's many times people will ask me to write a story for their anthology, and so these stories are sort of out there in various different places. This is the first time that they're all going to be together in one place. And there's also a number of news stories that have never been published
Yeah.
before. So it's a mixture of stories from my entire career. Also, I've gone through all those stories and I've updated them. I've revised them. I've made them more relevant to our time. And so there's total rewrites of existing stories plus the new ones. And I'm very excited to have this compendium out there.
Now, when you were putting it together, did it strike you there was a theme throughout all the stories? Like, is there anything linking them together? Or are they all separate worlds on their own?
Well, they're all separate stories, but the
Okay.
one thing that I did do is I divided them into these different categories because a lot of them fell into, they fell into their own categories. And so I sort of sort them that way. I think there's seven. There's forces of nature, angels, demons, and monsters, the wheel of destiny, attics, basements, windows, and walls, the living, the dead, and the undecided. I'm not myself today. And the last one is You Reap What You Sow, which are stories that take place within the world of Scythe.
Okay. Now, oh gosh, maybe it's not fair to ask you if you had a favorite out of all the stories.
Oh, that's really hard. That's really hard to pick. There's so many of the stories in the collection that I love. I mean, the first story in the collection is my newest story, so I'm particularly fond of that one. It's I don't want to say much about it because it was a spoiler if I give it away, but it's about a presidential election and a very unlikely presidential candidate. And it really
Okay.
kind of pokes fun at our own electoral process.
Now, do you feel from the beginning to now, do you feel like your writing has evolved? Your writing process, has it changed? I mean, I'm guessing in the beginning you didn't have any kids, and then now suddenly you have kids and they've grown. I mean, I'm guessing, your habits must have changed over time.
There's still certain things that don't change. There's some things that do change, things that don't. Uh, in terms of how I do it, that has stayed exactly the same. Uh, I still write longhand. I write in a notebook.
Oh, that's a lost art these
I
days.
don't sit at the computer to write.
Yeah.
There's a few good reasons for that.
Hmm.
I mean, first of all, if I started on the computer, my entire life is going to be staring at a computer screen. I don't want that.
Hmm.
Uh, Secondly, I just like the feeling. Every time I sit down with a notebook, I get that feeling that I got when I was a kid sitting to write. And I just love that feeling. And finally, I know that if I start on the computer, I'm not going to put as much effort into the revision because, I mean, we tend to get lazy. We tend to skim instead of really read it word to by word. But if you handwrite it, you've got to type it in. And I will sit there and I will physically type it in. And as I'm typing it, I change everything. And sometimes I can't even read my own handwriting. And so I have to change it just because I can't see what I've written. But it always gets better. It's always much better. I'm getting an instant revision just by typing it in. So that is an important part of the process. And I don't do like I don't write an entire book that way. I'll write a chapter, then I'll switch to the computer, I'll type it in, I'll revise it a few times, and then I'll go back to the notebook. So that's my process, uh, and I like it, and it works for me.
Okay, now you co-authored a few books with your son Jared. Um, does it change does the process change because you have a collaborator? Like, I mean, would he do longhand with you?
Well, the
Yeah.
process does change
Okay. Yeah.
with a collaborator, and every collaborator, you work at different ways with different
Yeah.
collaborator. When I'm working with Eric Elfman, I mean, we did the Accelerati trilogy, which is Tesla's Attic, Edison's Alley, and Hawking's Hallway, and also the Noah Files, which is the more recent series. Uh, we get on Google Docs and we FaceTime
Mm-hmm.
simultaneously, and we are working out on the same paragraph at the same time on screen. Even when we physically get together, we're facing each other, looking at our computers, looking at the same document. So
Yeah.
whether we're in the same room or across the
Yeah.
country from each other, it's still the same process.
Mm.
With Jared, he didn't want me looking over his shoulder while he was writing, so he didn't like that process. So the way that we worked was we would talk about each chapter, we would talk about the voice of each character because in the books that we've written, there are multiple character voices
Mm.
that are narrating the story. Now you would think that we would divide that up and he would take one character and I would take another character, but that's not what we did. Uh, I started with the character of Alyssa. I wrote the first chapter, and he wanted to write the second chapter, which was in the voice of a character named Kelton. We talked about the difference in the voices. Kelton, we decided, was going to sort of like sound like a noir detective. And so Jared ran with that, and he developed that voice. But when it came time to come back to Kelton, I took it over and
Mm-hmm.
copied that voice. And then he took over the Alyssa chapter, the next chapter, and matched my voice. We were able to match each other's voices for those characters. So we would go back and forth and switch it up. And it's to the point that when we look back at it, we can't remember who wrote what.
Oh, wow. Okay. Now, have you asked your other kids to help, or is it just Jared's interested?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I've told all my kids whenever you want to work with me,
Yep.
whenever you want to write with me, I'm available to do that with you. And
That's
my daughter Joelle wrote the opening story in Gleanings, which is in verse, and it you know I would have collaborated with her on it, but she did such a good job on her own that really didn't need to do anything. I mean, that's her story.
okay.
And then my son Brendan, a number of the stories in MindWorks several of them, I think three of them are stories that I co-wrote with him because
Ah.
nowadays, whenever I get asked to contribute to an anthology, I say, well, I'll do it, but I want to co-write it with my son, Brendan. And so we
Mhm.
get the chance to write together in short stories. And then my daughter, Erin, she's an artist, and we've been talking about writing a graphic novel together.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I have a young child too. Like we did a picture book, but now he's embarrassed because he says it's a baby book. But I've been trying to get them to, write with me, but now they're just too obsessed with their iPads. So
So
eventually.
my kids are all grown. So my
Yeah,
my youngest is 26, and so so it's different when you're writing with your kids
yeah.
as adults.
Oh, definitely. One day. Okay, now you also teach and mentor young writers. What's the most important piece of advice you find yourself giving them over and over again?
Character, character, character. Everything has to be seen through to the eyes of the character. The character is the most important thing in the story. You can start with a plot, you can start with a theme, you can start with a setting, but ultimately, once you've created that, the only thing that brings a story to life and makes it compelling are the characters. So if your characters are subservient to your theme or subservient to your plot, then the story isn't compelling.
Hmm.
It's you have to care about the characters, and the characters have to feel real. There's many times that I'll read stories by aspiring authors that that the characters start doing things that are clearly written in the outline for the characters to do,
Hmm.
but aren't what real people would do. If your characters start to rebel against what you want them to do, you've got to throw away your story. You
Mm.
have to let the characters decide what happens in the story. And then once you know the decisions that they're going to make, then you can rework the story based on their decisions, but don't force their decisions based on what you want them to do. So that's the best advice that I could give.
Okay. Now, how do you encourage writers to push past self-doubt or creative blocks?
It's come down to that old Nike commercial, which I often think of all the time. Just do it.
Yeah, that's
Just do it. Stop thinking about it. Stop worrying about it. Stop second guessing yourself. Just do it. And then once you're done, then you can look at it, then you can obsess, then you can have all of that trauma of dealing with what you've written. But you know what, just write it first and then let that resolve itself later. So there's many times when I'm stuck in a story, and something that I've learned is that there's no such thing as writer's block.
hmm
Writer's block is a construct. It's something that we make up. See, the thing is, when you get when you first start writing, sometimes it's easy. You have your idea, and it's coming faster than you can write it down, and then that stops. The thing is, it always stops, and then you're stuck, and it feels like you just can't get any more done. That's not writer's block. That's
hmm
writing. Writing is 90% being stuck. And
hmm
if you just understand that that is the normal process and that is the normal state of writing rather than something that's blocking you, you'll always be able to work your way through it. Just understand that it's an expected part of the process. It's never fun. Not everything about writing is fun. You have to be willing to work through the hard stuff too.
Yeah. Now, you've sustained a long career, so what keeps you inspired to keep writing new worlds and characters?
The readers. I mean, the fans coming to me and telling me what the books mean to them, how the books have affected their lives. I can't tell you how many times people have come up to me and said things like, Challenger Deep saved my life. To know that words and ideas can have that much power, it makes you feel very responsible for what you write. So I never write anything lightly, and I always look at what I'm doing in terms of, am I adding something that the world needs, that is positive for the world? And it also makes me want to do it more because I feel as if I'm doing something that is helping the world.
Okay, now, what's your next project? Are you allowed to share? I guess while MindWorks is coming out, and then, um,
But what I'm working on now is a prequel to Scythe. It
mm,
was going to be one book, but now it's either going to be a duology or a trilogy. and it's basically the beginning of the world of Scythe. You know, how did the Thunderhead, this AI that takes care of the world, how did that evolve? What happened when we became immortal?
Hmm.
And what was that like? So I'm working on that now. I'm about at page 450 of the first book. It's probably going to be in another 100 pages, and then I'm going to get to work on the next one. I'm also going to be writing a second book in the All Better Now series. All Better Now, which is right there. That's my latest book. That one is about the pandemic of happiness. So, you know, once you get this virus, you become deeply satisfied and deeply content for the rest of your life. And so people want to start catching it. But that poses
Mm.
problems because our world doesn't work if everybody's happy. You know, who's going to buy all of the junk that they try
Yep.
to sell us if we don't need it? How do politicians get their power if they can't rile us up and get us angry anymore?
Mhm.
And so there's a vested interest in finding a cure to happiness. So that's a duology, and All Better Now is the first book, and All Over Now is the second
Okay.
one. But I'm not going to start on that one until I finish the Scythe prequel, which is going to be called Rising Thunder.
Now, how long does it take for you to write a book?
It varies, and I never write a book from beginning to end because there's multiple times during the writing process that I'll burn out on it and want to switch to a different project. So from beginning to end, it might take 2 or 3 years, but that's not working continually. If you
Mhm.
take all of the time that I'm working on a book and put it together, it usually comes out to be about 6 to 9 months.
Mhm. Okay. All right. So, Neil, you're going to do a reading for us. So, can you please give us some context before you start?
Okay, so this is a story in the world of Scythe, and it takes place before the book. So this takes place during what I call the Mortal Purge. It's probably about 100 years before the book series, when there was a group of Scythes who decided that anyone who was born mortal during the Age of Mortality should be killed. And so it's sort of a bad time in the Scythedom. And this is a story about a couple of people who are trying to escape that. And it features, although in the reading we're not going to get to this character yet, it features one of my favorite characters, not my favorite person because he's creepy, but one of my favorite characters from the Scythe books, Scythe Alighieri, and who's very, very vain and very, very self-centered and creepy. And the story is called None More Beautiful Than I. And rather than reading it from the book, it'll be easier for me to see it on the screen. So I'm going to read it from my file on the screen.
Sure.
Rasmus was not expecting to travel. He was fine staying put for the foreseeable future, but life and death had other plans for him. The hypertrain ticket had appeared on Rasmus's phone as he rode his bike home from school. It arrived with an unusual chime to alert him of something out of the ordinary. Amsterdam to Frankfurt, Frankfurt to Rottenburg, Ob de Tauber, a small town in the Bavarian region. At first, he thought the ticket was an error, but how could it be? The sentient cloud, which most people were now calling the Thunderhead, never made mistakes. Was this trip a surprise from his grandmother? An unscheduled vacation for them? He tried to paint it positive, but a part of him already knew the ticket was the portent of something darker. No, Rasmus, this is not my doing, his grandmother confirmed when he arrived home. She looked pale, distracted, and although she wouldn't say it aloud, he knew what she was thinking. The purge comes to Amsterdam. If that were so, then the ticket was a lifeline, and it could be their only one. Rasmus asked the Thunderhead about it. The tickets were not in any way arranged by me, the Thunderhead told him, then gave an odd, roundabout explanation. It is my understanding that the tickets were purchased for you by the acquaintance of a friend of one of my Nimbus agents. Beyond that, I do not have the authority to discuss it. The truth was not in what the Thunderhead said, but in what it didn't say. Because the only thing it had no authority to discuss was Scythe business. It couldn't interfere in the purge of mortal-borns. However, an acquaintance of a friend of a Nimbus agent was far enough removed from the Thunderhead that it didn't violate the separation of Scythe and state. Rasmus could just imagine how the Thunderhead had handled it. I am thinking that a holiday for Elke Vanderlip and her grandson would be prudent for their states of mind, it would have casually said to one of its agents. And if that agent concluded that maybe this had to do with the mortal purge, well, that was the agent's business. Rasmus was not mortal-born. He was 16, which meant that humanity had officially achieved immortality over 30 years before his birth. But his grandmother, who had raised him for most of his life, had been a teenager herself when natural death was extinguished. The purge hated nothing more than those who came of age right at the cusp of eternal life, as if they were somehow less deserving of it. I will leave and take refuge, she told him, as she packed a small suitcase. You don't have to join me. But Rasmus knew otherwise. If a Scythe of the Purge were to show up to glean his grandmother and she wasn't there to be gleaned, they would take Rasmus's life instead, if only out of spite. Scythes of the Purge were known to be ruthless, and their dark ideology left no room for mercy or nuance in their gleaning choices. If you were born mortal and you were caught in their sights, you were dead. If you assisted someone who was born mortal, you were dead as well. So, with the purge gaining momentum around the world, perhaps this journey should have been expected, because it was inevitable. We'll go together, Rasmus said. It'll be an adventure. His grandmother nodded, and they spoke no more of it as they packed. The Amsterdam train station was the largest maglev hub in the Euroscandian region. Dozens of hypertrains going to hundreds of destinations. And although many things had changed in the years since humanity gained immortality, travel had not. It was still a complicated affair, with irritated crowds, whining children, and luggage getting in everyone's way. Of course, the Thunderhead had done away with delays and there were no more lost luggage issues, but people still found plenty to complain about. Even so, the Thunderhead encouraged travel. In a perfect world, humans should be free to explore, expand their experience, satisfy their curiosity. And what are we seeking if not a perfect world? Unfortunately, many of the world's Scythedoms had a very different definition of perfection. Rasmus spotted the Scythes first. 4 of them. That was how he knew. Scythes of the Purge always traveled in groups of 4, like the 4 horsemen of the biblical apocalypse. It was designed to instill fear, as were the skull patterns on their robes. It worked. Do you think they're looking for us? Rasmus asked. Let's not find out, his grandmother said, keeping her face down, because although a kerchief could cover her telltale gray hair, nothing could hide the age in her eyes and the wrinkles on her face. The trick was avoiding the Scythes without appearing to. And while everyone might try to avoid normal Scythes, no one but mortal-born steered clear of Scythes of the Purge. Running or even turning in a sharp direction became a red flag to them, and they would pursue. His grandmother suddenly became flustered, grabbing his phone as the Scythe strode closer. What do you mean you can't find the ticket? It's right on your phone, she said, as if they had been in the middle of some conversation. All right, so this was a ruse, something to give reason for any anxiety the Scythes might read in them. Rasmus could play along. I don't know, said Rasmus, grabbing his device back. It was right there a second ago. And she snapped it from him again. You always have too many apps open. That's the problem. And then a deep voice rang out beside them. You there! Stand where you are! Rasmus and Elke froze. And the 4 Scythes strode past them, zeroing in on a man who did not seem old at all. You think you can fool us by turning a corner, Mr. Connick, said the lead Scythe. But no matter how many years you turn the clock back on your age, your birth date remains the same. The resonance of the Scythe's voice had grabbed the attention of everyone nearby, just in time to see the flash of a blade and hear a yelp cut short. Mr. Connick fell to the ground. His eyes gazed upon his killer, holding eye contact in defiance until it was clear there was no one behind those eyes anymore. And then one of the other Scythes, A woman as stone-faced as the one who had killed Mr. Connick came toward Rasmus, looking at him with her piercing eyes. An unfortunate consequence, she said, and raised a finger, pointing at Rasmus, who felt his knees becoming weak. Then he followed her finger to a spot of blood that had spattered on his shirt. Our apologies, she said, but it will come out in the wash. Then the four of them breezed off, leaving the dead man for a cleanup crew that was most certainly on its way.
Wow,
And
well,
that is the opening of None More Beautiful Than I.
that was pretty grim. Okay. Next time I go to the airport, I'll be like, oh, thank goodness I'm not being hunted. Ugh.
As well, they are on their way. There's a good Scythe that they're going to meet that is going to help them get to a castle that has been taken over by Scythe Alighieri, who is giving refuge to mortal-borns, but only as long as they treat him like royalty.
Interesting. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us again, Neal.
You're very welcome. It was fun.
For more upcoming episodes of the Artsy Raven about writing and publishing, visit us at jfgarrard.com/arpodcast. A reminder to Patreon subscribers that there is bonus content available for every episode on the Patreon website. If you enjoyed the show, you can show your appreciation by buying us some digital coffee. The Artsy Raven is produced by J.F. Garrard. The voice in the show's introduction is Chris Gorman, and music is by Tim Moore. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time, stay safe.